Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. Last video we looked at all the bits and pieces to do to put together the parts to create a song, which we then went through and did a simple mix on and a very basic master. This time, as promised, we're going to look a lot more at mastering. Some of the first thing that we've got to do is dig ourselves out of a hole that has happened over the last 20, 30 years. Mastering has become like this really weird urban legendy sort of thing. And I saw that rise in the 90s where people were suddenly talking about, oh, it's black magic, no one can understand that. And it got so ingrained that mastering is a thing that nobody knows how to do that people started to make up stuff about it. Most of what you hear about mastering is to a great extent urban legend. It might be based upon something that happens or happened once, or a story that was, but it's not necessarily what's really being done to get tracks finalized, to get them out there in the real world. So there'll be a little bit of, let's get rid of the unnecessary, the stupid, the dangerous information so that we can start again with something that's useful. If you think it's just me being negative for an old guy or whatever, that's on you. I really want to clear the way to give people the best chance of working out a path that works for them, rather than simply watching tuts that are super fast and give you 10 best tips and being just as mystified as they were before, or even worse, spending a whole pile of money on software that claims that it's going to master things for you. Really, really bad cool. I am also this time, because it's such a big subject and a lot of moving parts, working from a script. So you will see me looking across to that to make sure that we are covering everything as we should. That is the article that's written that will be published alongside of this on higherhertz.com. Where we've landed after the last 30 or so years is this weird idea that mastering is what makes a song great. That your song can be almost any kind of drivel that fell on the sidewalk after a big night out, and that if we master it right, it's going to be, and we're going to have hits with it. No, not at all. Mastering is a part of the process, but it's in many ways the least important part of the process. If you get everything up to the master done really well, or even adequately, then you have got a workable song or piece of music. It's just easier to say song now. If you have a poor piece of work, something where you've cut a lot of corners, then it's never going to fire. So I'll pop up a graphic, and you'll see here on this pointy image that the mastering bit is hiding on the end, and it's quite tiny, and it just says fit. Mastering is about making the piece of work fit for the purpose in which it's going to happen. I commonly these days liken mastering to as being like the process for a box of tissues. You get your box of tissues, you pull one out, and then the next one is there ready to go. Mastering is like that. It's not about making the next song ready to play, but it's about making that piece of music, that piece of work of yours, function in the box in which it is to be delivered. It's about wrapping up the mix that's been made, but the mix is, again, of no importance if you don't have a well-performed piece. So you see that most of the writing in this image is on the other end. All the work is in creating a good song. If you don't write a good song, it won't matter how well it's performed, because it'll still be a lame song. If you put in a poor performance of even a great song, you undo it. Which is why I don't spend my time singing Unchained Melody, or much of anything, because I'm a poor performer. I know that. I joke about it, but I know my limits. Doesn't mean that I didn't almost get signed as a performer, and my vocal prowess was not the reason that things didn't go ahead. You can be poor and still succeed. There are plenty of people out there. But the reason that most songs fail is not because of the mastering or even the mix. it's because they haven't put in the time and energy. I'll pop up another graphic to cover that, where we've got a Venn diagram showing greatness or ways to cut corners, which is often that people want to do something too quickly. And there's so much of that in Dorville where we're encouraged to, oh, well, you need to be able to do this super fast, or this software is going to make it super fast for you. It's like, well, if you don't have the passion to put in the time to make this worthwhile, why are we doing this? Fine, if you're just having a laugh, that's okay. Then you maybe show it to one of your mates and you put it in the bottom drawer and forget about it. But that's not a career. That's okay. That's a laugh. And the other side is cheap. Again, people who don't want to commit themselves to the thing. So they want it to be really cheap, they want it to be quick, they want it to be no effort, but they expect it to be great. So if you look right in the middle of that Venn diagram, it says, here be unicorns and fools. We're going to end up with either garbage or something that's so unrealistic it can't happen. Make sure we put in the time, which is that graphic where there's a lot of time and attention to what we write, how we deliver it, then making sure that it's got a good mix. Then we can finalize it and it will work anywhere, even if it lacks what some people might call perfection. There's a lot of music out there that has been released that there are a lot of possible technical issues that could be raised, but you know what? Who cares? Because it fires. So, what's the difference between mixing and mastering? A lot of these questions were put to me, so to me they sort of seem like, okay. But it is a question that does get asked, so it is fair and appropriate to provide it with an answer. Well, mixing is balancing the parts. You see here up on my mixer, I've got all these parts. I've got some drums, bass, guitars, some melody loops, and then these vocal parts. We mixed those in the last video on the putting together, and the mix is about balancing those parts. You don't see it dramatically on my mixing boards because I do a lot of my level setting before I get to the mixing board, but that is why the faders on a mixing board tend to be all kind of higgledy-piggledy on level. It's about finding the point at which those parts all become one. So we take many, I don't know how many we've got there, let's say it's 10, so these 10 tracks, they have to come out the speakers as one song. I hear quite a lot of tracks from indies where they're trying to mix and they haven't got that concept of it's many to one. And I hear like 35 things rattling, like a bunch of bolts in a cardboard box. They're rattling around, but at no point have they worked out how to make them move together as one. That's something we will talk about a little bit more later. So mixing is many to one. Mastering is taking that one and, as I said before, making sure that it's going to fit in the box in which it is delivered. Simple as that. There is technicality in both of these stages, but I'm going to stay out of it to a great extent because the constant talking about technicality and people making their YouTube videos saying it's doing more damage than good. People are missing the concept that this is all about. You know, the great mastering engineers of yore were artists. Commonly, they were mix engineers who it then turned out had a greater forte, a greater artistic skill in the final stage than they did in the many to one. Great! But don't let that be the impression that they're doing anything that a mix engineer isn't already able to do if they understand the thinking. And the reason that most mixers don't do very well, or that masters are causing problems for the mix or the song, is simply because the person hasn't stopped to understand what's the thinking, what's the big picture. What a mixed and mastered song sound like? Well, my first answer to that was like, what a silly question. They should sound pretty well the same. But bearing in mind we've got this concept that that mastering takes God knows what and turns it into all kinds of amazeballs, it's not surprising that people should think that perhaps there's a massive difference, that you can feed in, some mud and get sparkly gold and diamond and all kinds of bling out the other end. Mastering is not alchemy. Alchemy didn't exist in the first place, at least not the populist concept of turning lead into gold. It doesn't happen. You can't put lead in the microwave and double boil in trouble and get gold. Curses. So what does it sound like being in the DAW we can show you. Here is the track that we worked on last time, and here is a master that I ran off after giving it a tiny bit of love in speakers, because I hate what happens in these things.
Rolling down the street,
Mastered version.
ladies in the seat, they're all hip-hop dancers, splashing at the speed with my
Punch and all the things it's listenable. This is the mix.
My 2.0 and my water gun. My 2.0 and my water gun. The girls in the right holla, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the right holla, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the right holla, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the right holla, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now there is a difference, but if you're not listening closely, you may not spot it. That's because a good mix should be ready to go. We should be able to take a good mix, put it on the radio and have it work. Okay, fair enough. I get that if we're putting it on the radio against someone or other's song that's been mastered up at, like -2 LUFS, then our mix is going to come across quiet. But guess what? Your streaming disservice is likely to do the volume leveling and pull the level of yours up just as it's pushing the overmastered one down. So if we put this mix up, it's still going to work. People should be there listening to the song. If they're listening to the song and going, haha, that's funny, that's amusing, I want to hear that joke again, then we've done our job right. Mixing and mastering.
Yeah, I'm packing plastic. Yo, you want some?
We look at our levels here. That's the mastered.
The girls in the right holla, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the right holla, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the right.
We see ourselves on the mixed, both lose and gain. Our peaks are a little higher, and our RMS or our VU is a little lower. So what I've done with the master is just reduce some of the dynamic range to allow us to bulk things up. It is not uncommon for mix engineers, and I will do the same to some extent, to ask for the mix to be sent over at a maximum of -6 dB peak. The reason for this is for no other reason than to avoid the unwise decisions of the less than wise. In the old days, when a mixing engineer was finishing their song, they would put mix bus compression on. They would say, this is how we want our mix to sound. This is how the mix should sound. It would go off to the mastering engineer, who was then physically preparing it to go on mostly vinyl. So a 7-inch vinyl for a single, which has slightly different technical requirements, 12-inch vinyl for the LP, and the understanding that they were then going to get played on AM or maybe FM radio, but commonly heard on a little tinny tranny on a 2-inch paper cone speaker. But also there were the few audiophile freaks who were going to have a good to, oh my god, they spent that much money on that kind of a system. And it had to work equally across the board. So the compression was already done, but if people are going to send you less than wise master bus compression, commonly having killed their own track, it's better to simply say no master bus compression and give me something that's at -6 dB, because if you say, yeah, just send me something that's not clipping, they'll probably send you something that's at +3 dB. It's clipped already. There's nothing you can do. When you send back the best that you can do, because they tell you that it's like great, then they will dump on the engineer when the impossible was not able to be done. When somewhere down the track someone says it's distorted, they will forget the conversation. So it's simply easier to make somewhat absurd requests, which is don't do any master bus compression and deliver it to me with such a massive headroom that the chances of you having clipped that in the process are essentially zero. So the difference between a well-mixed piece and a mastered piece in a perfectly ideal world would be next to nothing, next to no difference. Personally, it's not uncommon for my mixes to come in quite quiet because I have my volume knob on my audio interface. That goes up. I have set positions for when I'm listening to music, just sitting here. typing or whatever I'm doing, interneting, listening to Van Halen or Duran Duran or Alan Parsons or whatever, listening to great music, it's at a certain level. It's halfway up. And then when I'm working in my DAW, composing or mixing before mastering, it goes to 3/4 of the way over. That's adding, I don't know, maybe up to about 12 dB of level. And then when I come up to the mastering point, it's not uncommon for my mixers, not so much of this kind of stuff, to be like this. So of course, and this is what we hear when we go listen to people's ABs. They're being sneaky. What happens is, obviously, when we listen to oh wow, that mastering is so good. But if we were to take this and normalize it, which is equal to pulling it up to here, we would hear that the difference, it was never a mastering engineer's job to take the music and change it. There were quite a few times where mastering engineers would have gotten shitty letters, typed or handwritten. I'll never use you again because you changed the tone of my record. That was a no-no. Although there were times. There's a story, apocryphal or not, I don't know, of, I think it's U2's Joshua Tree, where the mastering engineer hopped on the phone. He's listening to it going, I think it's a bit muddy. But rather than change it, he hopped on the phone, and I think it might have been across time zones, so he woke somebody up and said, I'm not sure, did you want this to sound this way? And they were like, no. And so he changed the tone of the record. That was what mastering always was. So, in terms of answering the question, should they be different? No. The mix should come through good to go. Then mastering is making sure it fits in the box, which is what we've got here. So to give you an idea, here is... She only love me when I'm gangster. She only love me when I'm gangster. Now if I turn off the mastering section here, see how there is no difference. I just ran these off, bounced them inside, and as you hear when we turn off the mastering, there is no difference. But the master does add something, and that's just made it play better. The distinctions between mixing and mastering workflow was the next question that I got, and I must admit I really scratched my head on this. So in some ways I sort of sidestep it because it's like the difference between driving a car and a tractor. Yeah, we got a steering wheel and we got some pedals. And I guess if we're driving a modern Massey or John Deere, which has got a cabin and a stereo to play my Garth Brooks, then there sort of isn't as much difference. It's just like a big, slow, funny-looking car. Mixing and mastering technically is not really that different. There are a lot of tools out there that are sold as though they're going to do a different job. Or, well, you use this tool for mixing and use that tool for mastering. Okay, if it amuses you, go down that path. But you know what? Sound is sound is sound is sound is sound is sound is sound. So you can use any tool that you got. There are times where I've wanted a master to come out a particular way, and I have put in tools like a sort of dirty Moog ladder filter. Oh no, but it's not a mastering tool. Don't be silly. Especially in the digital world, which is honestly far better than the analog world, then the tools are the tools. They do the job. Grab the tool that A, you've got, and B, you know is going to do the job. That is it. Might as well address the analog thing, seeing I've raised it already. It was a little lower on the list, but I've raised it already. People say, oh, but you need analog, man, to get proper mixes and especially proper masters, you know, because digital is... If you know what you're doing, both can sound great. If you don't know what you're doing, both will sound terrible. This is a difference between a skilled and experienced engineer and somebody who's trying to do their best at best, but probably knowing that they don't know what they're doing, but still soldiering on. I mean, in some ways, yes, that maybe makes you a champion if you ever get good at it, but otherwise, no, it probably makes you silly if you're trying to succeed and exceed when you're not suited to it. So again, I use that correlation. There's me who can't sing or play guitar. How smart would it be for me to set out to make a guitar-based record in which I sing? Not very smart at all. Common sense would be, hello, Eddie Van Halen, are you free? Brilliant, I'll see you tomorrow. Rod Stewart, yeah, are you free? Oh, brilliant, I'll see you tomorrow. Now I'm going to have a record worth listening to because I've brought in people who know what they're doing, people who are better than me. Analog can sound good, but most of the time where you see people A-Bing between digital DAW sound and analog, they have not deliberately not put some kind of saturation in. So if we A-B within a DAW, and I've done several videos on that, between saturated and not saturated mixes, the saturated mix is like, ooh, cool, and the other one is like, yeah, okay, it's nice and clean and clear, but it maybe lacks a certain magic. So they're not comparing A to B or apples against apples, they're comparing apples against lollipops and saying there's a difference. Well, duh, there's a difference. There is no real difference in the tools. Know your tools, know what you're looking to achieve, and most importantly, why. Otherwise, you will probably make a doofus of yourself. Now, in terms of the tools that are used, and we're going to look into those in ways which we cannot in the article, so bear with me. Very simply, a simple mastering process is an awful lot less than most people think. Having spoken to some real mastering engineers, and by that I mean real mastering engineers, not just guys who set themselves up on the internet, couldn't get any mixing work, and so declared themselves to be a mastering engineer because rappers just love to spend money on mastering engineers, then quite simple process. We can do it with a groove or glue compressor into an EQ, into limiter and or clipper, manage your output levels, it is out the door. That is nice and simple. There are, of course, situations in a DAW where we probably are going to benefit from putting some extra processes in that chain. In which case, and there is no rule about what order these things are in, there are some common sense reasons to put one thing in front of another, and if your reasons change, you move them around. I've built something that makes certain sense, even though it's not exactly what I'm going to show you. So we can have our groove or glue compression. Put it through us into a saturator. Some people put their saturation first. I tend to do it afterwards because that way the levels are perhaps managed a little differently. Personal choice. EQ. I will put the EQ after the saturation because it means I probably need to do a little less EQing. That's a good thing. Limiting or clipping, and into a tape emulation. And then my output levels. The reason in this instance that I'm showing the tape emulation where it is simply because in the old days we got our mix up, we put it through our master bus compressor, which was built into an SSL if we were so lucky. We fired it off to the 2-inch master tape, and that was it. Levels were managed, that tape was pulled off, stuck in its cardboard box, and sent off in the mail to the mastering engineer. Easy. I will tend to put my tape emulation earlier in the process, but there is no right or wrong. Either way, what we do is the sum of its parts. Now we get to walk through showing you a master in action. We can get rid of the mixer because we don't need it. We'll pull this down just so that we can still see what we've got. Now I'll open up my master section. Make sure that I'm on the live version. Currently it's got its mastering.
Don't sit me down, I got water pistols singing out to the last song sung.
And if I turn it off, what I'll do is leave it on but turn off each of these processes, except for that one. Actually, I'll leave that one on as well, just in case, because I don't want to send anything through that we don't want. So there is going to be a clipper happening, but now we work through very carefully and very methodically. The process that I commonly use, and I haven't put tape in here because I wanted to keep it as simple as possible, but tape is a form of saturation, and this is a form of tape saturation, even though it doesn't have spinny reels. If you want to see me working with a tape unit, there's the G-Sonic analog tape, which was a review I did not so long ago. That commonly appears in a lot of my mixes, but this was always meant to be fairly simple. First thing I do is this thing, compression. Now, the mistake I see a lot of people make is that they try to go super fast and use this to control levels. So it becomes kind of like a limiter. So we'll pick a loud bit, loop it, let me give myself a little more pedal, and they will be doing things like this. Now, if you've got your speakers or maybe headphones, but I hate doing these things, but even in the cans, I can hear that suddenly sounds throttled. Like, it's we're not winning. The idea of the compressor at this point is not to manage levels. Most of our levels should have been managed at the mix. If you've got problems with too much dynamic range, as in too many peaky transients, just clip, 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 but your track still stands quiet, that's not a mastering issue, that's a mixing issue. Stop what you're doing right here, turn this off, go back over here, find out where your problem is. And again, if you're not really skilled and experienced enough in this, bring in someone who is, because there's a far greater chance of me selling that record of mine if I've got Eddie Van Halen playing guitar and Rod Stewart singing than if I'm, well, what we'll loosely refer to as playing guitar and singing. Plus, I've got access to their networks. The moment my record goes out featuring Eddie Van Halen and Rod Stewart, people are going to go, what's that? What's that? I need to have a listen to that. Some diehard fans will just buy it regardless because it's got Eddie and or Rod on it. That's accessing their networks. What we're looking for here is not to control levels at all. What we're looking to do is to groove. It's commonly also called glue, but I prefer the term groove because it gives us a far better sense of what we're really trying to do. So I'll show you how I set up a glue compressor. I will start by just leaving my inputs. In this case, we've got plenty of level coming in. If I didn't have plenty of level coming in, I would push. Or, seeing we're in Dorville, I'd probably grab another one of these little fellas and put it in the front, set my levels independently, making it much easier to A/B my compressor. I'll set my threshold as low as I can. I will set my ratio to pretty darn high. I'll set my attack and release as low as they go, and my output I'll generally leave alone, but it's not uncommon to want to boost it a little bit because the levels will go low. Just want to be able to hear what I'm doing. Okay, brutalizing. Good, that's exactly what I want to do at this point. What I'm going to do over the next little while is nothing to do with sound quality, it's to do with feel. Remember, it's called a groove compressor. What we do here is we work out what's the overall groove of this piece. And I will raise this, and somewhere around here, you can hear it suddenly starts to throttled, starting to open up. But now we've lost that. And you can hear there's a real good. That's exactly what we're looking for. My release is as fast as it'll go. I will now raise this. Hear how that becomes more pronounced? Kind of flat. And this is why, one of the reasons why you do not want to get a music bed that has been pre-mastered, because you won't be able to do anything like this with it. I get a much nicer result when I carried Mike's. Sorry, I've forgotten to mention. My bad. Sorry, Mike. The song was the lyrics were written by Mike Packett and sung by Mike Packett of Naked Head and the Packets, if you know of them. But Naked Head are a band that I've done a lot of work with, mixing their record, Naked Nation, and so I ended up, after being stiffed by a young rapper, calling on Mike once I got the concept of, yeah, let's make this a joke song, and he delivered this. So I carried his vocal parts into the music bed where it was actually being made, so I could make a proper mix rather than doing it against a music bed, which is what you saw in the last video. And the mix improves instantly because we got breathing room, we got space to make it work. Because everything's now happening together, they're all gluing, they're interacting together rather than being this blob and this blob trying to come together, and they're now working together, so you get a much better result. And feel how this grooves. So now I will raise my threshold. Louder but flat. We've got a good punch to this. This is what we want. So I found a threshold at which that is happening, and now I probably want to back this off. Yeah, I've lost a little bit of level, but not a problem at all because we've got 11 billion ways to raise the level. I'm not even going to bother to change it here. In theory, we could sort of say, oh, we've lost a couple of dB and gain stage it back, but don't care. With that, it's probably a little easier for you to hear a fair A-B, so you hear that it just gets more hitch, more jump to it when we do that. That's what groove or glue compression is about. It's about finding that point at which it, ooh, and that works really nicely. You can use almost any compressor for it, but you'll find those that are heavy-handed, Rough Rider and the like. Molot, to some extent, can be a little... I've not taken to Molot as a mastering compressor, even though it, in theory, is, but it's a case of what you learn to do with it. The SSL Master Bus compressor is pretty famous for this. Its controls are more limited, so I like to have more control, and this is a beaut for that. Next stage is I'm bringing in, this is the tape algorithm, but it's just saturation. It's not doing any squirrely-whirly. My advice, if you're using a tape saturator, is that it is not, as I wrote in the article, designed to suddenly make your music sound like Kit ran over your piece because the Hoff ate too much purple neon. It's about very subtle kind of movement. If people are going, oh look, it sounds like it's drunk, then unless that's a very deliberate thing, that's not mastering, that's just adding a special effect. Your business, but we don't want to go that far. So this is just adding a kind of saturation. There is some compression stuff in here, but I keep that out of the game. Sometimes I like it, but I don't love it on the masters. But we've got a little bit of tape style saturation here. Now you hear how that adds a brightness and a sparkle. There's quite a bit of, well, splaturation across these drums. A, because, well, they come from Hank Shockley of the Bomb Squad, Public Enemy, so they were pretty blasted already. And B, because I've wanted them to sound really blasted. So they do get a little bit splatty. So mild tape saturation. Remember, we're not looking for splaturation. This is not a win. Not a win at all, boys and girls. So keep it very, very mild. I did show a collection of mixes with various other saturators. Hornet's Analog Stage was the one I really, really liked. Bedroom Producer Blog Saturator is actually really nice. You've got to be on the mild side with it, but that is also very nice too. Go watch those videos, see the total AB and how much the mix rises. But it's about a couple of layers. It should be in your mix. And making sure that the output really doesn't change, so that so we're getting this extra sparkle. Now that means that when I bring in my mastering EQ, I don't need to do much here. Let's turn these off for the moment. It's small, but we've got some boost up here, and that's more natural than grabbing this. Let's just turn that off and going, because that sounds horrid. Bit loud too. Hear how it kind of starts to sound thin and papery. And then to solve that, you'll be trying to do this. And it's just nasty. Do not do these things. Your saturator will bring brilliance without that papery sound. The first thing that I do at this point is to say, is there a frequency commonly in the mids to lows that is just making this mix sound a little too full? You can go searching for it this way. The danger with this is that everything will sound bad. So I don't encourage it unless you've got a sense of, well, I can already hear this sound. So let's say I can hear this. Over time, as you get more skills and experience, which is why you pay for skills and experience, you get to know roughly where that is, in which case you can already hear in your head and sort of go, look, it's a bit tubby here, and you just know. In which case you can either just go straight to, okay, I'll pull that out, or you can go searching for it. And I can't remember where I did have, and I would never do this in headphones, but let's say it's there. I'm hearing that sound. Oh, yep, I can hear that kind of cardboardy sound. That's all I'm looking for. If you go scanning across here looking for what sounds bad, everything sounds bad. So find the... Okay, that sounds a bit... Now with mastering, you generally don't want to be doing much more than about 2 dB. If you find you're making moves of more than about 2 dB, you're either overdoing it or there's something wrong with your mix. The other one is where I see people go, oh, but my kick drum's not loud enough. Well, that's your fault. You mixed this. Fix it. Going, yeah, no, my kick drum's loud enough is really a bad call. If your mix is not right, don't master it. If you're trying to fix your mix in the master, do not do this. Stop. Go back into the mix. If you can't go back into the mix, then you have to go back as far as you can. If you're at this point finding that your snare drum is too loud and I'm about to do something along these lines, go back as close to the mix as you can to fix that. So at this point, I've rolled off some of this. Compression can pull out some treble. But it's not really doing it in this instance. If you're trying to do level-based compression at this point, which I've said is unwise, yes, you will commonly lose quite a lot here, in which case you're going to want to put it back in. But if we want to brighten up these a tiny bit, we can find a point. And just a dB or so. The last thing that you want to see here is this kind of EQ curve across your masters. That is just a sign that there's something horribly, horribly wrong. 2 or 3 points is probably plenty. Yes, we could make a possible argument to say that we might pull some out about here, but bearing in mind a lot of this music is likely to be listened to on iPhones, which have a frequency range of about 1 to 8, then if I start pulling out here, I'm just making it quieter for no reason. So a couple of little tiny moves and we're probably okay. Now, I said I was going to make a change. I did notice coming back in after some days There is something about this that I don't love. I feel like the voice is fighting with, especially in the first verse, that the voice is fighting with.
No one says me down, I got water pistols rolling down the street in my pimped out Lancer. Ladies and
The drums and the top end of those are kind of fighting with his vocal struggles at that point. Now, I'd made some improvements, but coming back to it again after time, and we really should give ourselves time, I realised, look, there are things that we should do to fix this. Pushing his vocals just going to make it sound thin and papery. But the music itself,
hot dancers splashing at the speed with
we
my
can
bling
pull
and
that back.
crystals. No one says me down, I got water pistols singing out to the
Hear how his vocal suddenly becomes so much clearer?
last song sung in my 2.0 and my water gun. In my 2.0 and my water gun. The girls in the riding holler, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the riding holler, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the riding holler.
See? Yes, the hi-hats aren't quite as bright, but the hi-hats were fighting with his voice. We've got a lot of Splatsville happening up there. And it merges with his voice. We don't want that to happen. His voice has to be forward. So yes, I could have gone through and done it at the drums, but everything in here is very Splatsville and very pushed together, so I've done it at the bass, which is the equivalent of if you'd pulled in a music bed, and it was pre-mixed, God forbid pre-mastered, then you would come in here and you'd do it. If I was saying, look, I've got a problem with that, then I can pull it out.
Ladies in the seat, they're all hip-hop dancers splashing at the speed with my bling and crystals. No one says me down, I got water pistols singing out to the last song sung in my girls in the riding holler, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the riding holler, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the riding holler, yeah.
And in cans, actually, that seems like it might be a good decision. That's what you do. You do not spend your time going around with ducking, side chaining, mid-siding, and all that kind of stuff. Yes, you can do it, and if you're winning with it, great, but chances are it's just going to make things weird. This will not make things weird. So I've altered my mix ever so slightly. Now I've got clearer. I always have this fellow on. This is just across my masters from composition all the way through. It's a really nice, neutral, all-round kind of a saturation. So this is the sound of my door, is this little bit of soft tube. It's kind of inaudible, but if we A-B enough, you'll hear a slight jump.
They're all hip-hop dancers splashing at the speed with my bling and pistols. No one says me down, I got water pistols singing out to the last song sung in my...
Now you might say, but Benedict, you've got saturation here and you've got saturation here and you're about to add another little layer of it. Isn't that excessive? Well, bearing in mind that they're all very minor. Remember when I turned that up, it got all kinds of ugly? They're all very minor. Minor enough that unless you're really paying attention, you won't hear the A-B, but the total result is great. So one builds on the other. We add a little bit of saturation, a little bit of excitement here, and we're doing it again here. Generally, I will have something in between these two. So a second layer of saturation.
And my water gun. In my 2.0 and my water gun.
I'm constantly checking, is this adding value? If it's not adding value, it can go off, it can be deleted. Great. I come to making sure that I'm taking my overall level.
The riding holler, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the riding holler, yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the riding holler, yeah.
Now I've got let's just minimize a couple of these. I've got my levels that I'm looking at here.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The girls in the riding holler, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm rolling down the street.
We can see that my peak dB is a tiny bit low, as is my VU, meaning that I can lift the whole thing up a little bit. So that's what I'm doing here. We could do it here, but it makes it a little harder to A-B, so I'm in the habit of having these things, they're already built in.
Down Lancer, ladies in the seat, they're all hip-hop dancers splashing at the speed with my bling and crystals. No one says me down, I got water pistols singing out to the left.
Now that's looking good. Those numbers look textbook perfect. Not that I go by the numbers, I go by what I hear. It sounds nice, big and full. My numbers look great. It sounds great. If it sounds great when I'm down here,
Song sung in my 2.0 amp.
then I might say that's enough. But it doesn't. I know I can go harder. So we push in 3 dB here, which is
My water again in my 2.0.
giving us that really big full sound. And then it goes into a limiter and or clipper. Now
And my
I'm running a
water
clipper here,
The girls in the right holla, yeah, yeah.
and that's handling everything beautifully. We need to understand the difference between a limiter and a clipper. A limiter is a kind of compressor, and remember what a compressor does is it forces things down. It forces our whole mix down. We've used it there to make our mix get pushed up and down so that it creates groove. Remember when we had our attack and release super fast, it just sounded muddy, strangled, not cool. While people talk about limiters, limiters are bad on your masters in that they actually make your track sound strangled. Yes, you can push them really loud. You can get lots and lots of, especially if you've got a fancy maximizer limiter that's designed to be able to, soak up 20 dB. But that's just going to sound horrid. We won't have that crest factor, and I'll pop up a picture here of 12 dB. We'll have a crest factor of maybe 2 dB. And that's running at a LUFS of maybe -1 or -2 dB. Champion, you're a hero to no one. You can go into groups and say, look how much I've managed to make my track really super loud, dude. But no one's going to listen to your super stupidly loud track because it's uncomfortable. In another video, I showed a picture of the trash compactor in Star Wars. That's just what it feels like. You're being squished. So the limiter is not the first thing that you should be reaching for. Yes, it can be a brick wall limiter, a peak stop, blah, 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 and all this kind of technical. But remember, a limiter is designed to push your whole mix down. So you're actually making it quieter. Was that what you were trying to achieve? No. So, soft clipper. What a clipper does is that when something goes above, what's happened to my hand? Oh, it's disappeared. It's been chopped off. So a clipper simply takes what's gone over the top and chops it off. It doesn't push anything down, so you're not losing any level. We've just chopped it off. Yes, there's a little bit of distortion that's added, but remember I said I was going to add a little bit more. Soft clipping means that it blurs the edge. So kind of like me having a blur on the bit where my camera gets chopped off, so you can still see a little bit of this finger, and this one's starting to get a little bit faded out. So the clip is softer, and a soft clip actually sounds really quite good. We get a kind of brightness. I don't want to A-B here because we're going to possibly put splats down the track, but try it yourself. With a soft clip on-off, you will find that it gets this kind of cheery, kind of perky feel to it. But because I am hitting this with a certain amount of enthusiasm, then I will keep the limiter on. Because I'm using a soft clipper, I don't need any look ahead here. The soft clip's what's really doing the job. The limiter's just, I'm running a medium or slow input to it. We can let the release be auto.
The girls in the right holla, I'm rolling down the street in my pimped out Lancer. Ladies in the seat, girls, the girls in the right holla,
So the soft clipper's really doing all the absorbing of the transient. And that's great. It allows us to turn everything up that little bit louder to get good belly and sense of, manfulness. But we don't need to push our limiter much at all. But I do put it in there because the longer something stays in soft clip, the greater chance it has of sounding just distorted. And we go from that ooh, exciting, of soft clipping into ugh, which is what we got when I turned up the input to scream before, of it just sounded distorted. So it's about the wisdom to know and be able to hear and feel, which, remember, I can't do in these stupid things. And the final thing is always our final output levels. Now, officially, you will find that most places ask for a -1 dB final level. You'll notice I don't use much in the way of fancy meters, and I definitely don't use meters showing me things over time, and nor do I use LUFS. Read the article, watch the video that I did on levels in music. I talk about LUFS there. go have a look-see at that. I will use these.
Yeah, the girls in the rider holla. 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 Yeah, the girls in the.
I made my decisions that way, so I'll leave it there. I may undecide on those when I get out of cans, but it was there. But look,
the girls in the rider
I've got no clipping.
The girls in the rider holla.
I'm right, I don't need to know anything more. Yes, I do have this.
The girls in the rider holla. Yeah, the girls in the rider holla.
And that's showing me that I'm throwing plus 2 dB at this, which I can see here, and that's cool. That's all I need to know. I know that chances are with Softclip nothing is going through, but we can in digital get what's called intersample peaks, or just overs. So sample is here, and because of sample correction, which is brilliant and makes analog as good as digital and digital as good as analog, is that it's possible that the signal could be still rising between those two. So when it does its math, it's possible there could have been a rise, in which case we could get, I mean, some people try to say up to a couple of dB in between intersample peaks, but I don't know what you're doing to get there, but we could get something under a dB. It's probably going to be 0.5 or 0.3. It's going to be very small, if it even happens at all. I know that this tends to output. Let's get rid of that. See? We're still showing at what we'd probably round to -1 dB. But we will be on the safe side, so I tend to put -0.3 of a dB there. Now that I have never had any problems on any services anywhere, or MP3s or anything like that, because my mix is controlled. If you do find that you're having some hassles, you probably need to work on your mix a little bit, but if you do have hassles, then try going to -1 dB. Nobody's going to hear the difference.
The girls in the rider holla. The girls in the rider holla. The girls in the rider holla.
If you're A-Bing, yes, you can hear a difference, but nobody in the real world's going to hear a difference. But if you're looking at your output meters, you will see there that it's becoming a little excessive. So 0.3 of a dB is generally absolutely plenty to deal with any possible overs, especially if you're using a soft clip here. The idea with the look ahead is simply that it puts some latency in, allows the limiter to see what's coming in advance and make its decisions. And it's some kind of weird playing with time, loop back, what have you. It makes your limiter a little bit faster, but bearing in mind I don't like using the limiter for this, I rely on Softclip because that's brilliant for this. It's the best way of doing it. So we're good. I will print this. I'm not going to print this because I'm not going to print anything that was done in headphones, but I can call that. I would encourage you to overnight it, and if you're doing it yourself, to maybe come back a week later and see. But time and experience does mean you can become more confident. But understand there's a difference between confidence built out of skill and experience and, well, arrogance. The next step in conversation is about chains. Now, when I start a project, I've already got these fellas already there, but they're all off except for my soft clipper, my little level drop, and my soft tube knob, because I just want that to be the sound of my DAW. Nothing else is happening. I never work into master bus stuff. I know some people do, and bully for them, that's great, but especially if you're still training yourself, you do not want to do this. So keep them all off, make sure your mix works on its own and works really well, and then you can do the finalizing. Remember, mastering's all just about putting it in the box for delivery. So, chains of things or presets. No, no, and no. And before you ask, no. And software that does that, no. I do not believe in these things. I think they do vastly more damage than good. If you want to test this, this is your business. Go out, listen to people who are brand name this, that, and the other, and listen to their work. And then listen to people who don't go around talking about their presets, mastering chains, and brand name mastering plugin, and have a listen to the quality of work. Chances are you will find more work and far better work from those who are doing it out of skill and experience, from things they put together and work on every single time. While the DAW community, and particularly those trying to sell you their software, will tell you, oh, well, you just apply this preset and you're golden. Why do you think mix and mastering engineers are worth good money? Skill and experience. Please do not go applying chains or pieces of software that say they're going to do it for you. You're just setting yourself up to fail. Remember me as somebody who can't play guitar and, well, sings really terribly, setting myself out to try and have a successful record based on my singing and playing guitar. It's just an insta-fail. Facepalm. Get out there. Either train yourself, which means time and experience. If you don't have the time, you don't have the experience, you don't have the skills, or bring in somebody who has those skills and experience. Applying presets or chains or pieces of software that say they're going to do it for you, they won't. I have used one piece of software out of which I didn't dislike what it did. But the feedback that I got from people when I published my results, and I did it twice too, to really make sure that, both times was, well, I still prefer yours. That machine, the coder did a really nice job. It does work well, but it doesn't equal me. So chains, presets, software that says it's going to master for you, no, they are not the same as hiring somebody or learning to do it properly. Analog we covered, it's not better. It really is not better. Yes, analog there are some beautiful devices out there, but if you don't like the sound that's coming out of your DAW, learn to sound good. Or hire somebody who does sound good and approach them and say, hey, I love the sounds of your mixes. I love the feel that they've got. Here's what I'm doing. Would you like to mix for me? And if they are anywhere near decent people, they're going to go, yeah, I'd love to. Let's hear what you got. Or, yeah, look, I'm not feeling it. Maybe try this guy, or better luck. No, have a budget. Many versions of the master. This is a common one I see, and every time I just go, wah. Okay, on vinyl, remember I mentioned vinyl before, when we were in the good old 1980s, and we'd finished our track, and the girls in the ride go, yeah, yeah, yeah. How do we get it out there? How do we get it to the masses? How do we get it to radio stations? We got to stamp it onto a plastic dinner plate. That transition process from what we're hearing here, which is blammin' man, to the plastic dinner plate, did require an engineer who knew exactly what he was doing and how to make it work. Because what I think sounds brilliant here may not translate to vinyl. Because if there's too much bass, especially if there's too much stereo-ness in the bass, then the needle will jump off the record. Or there may be too much bass for us to be able to actually fit that on the record. Metallica, Justice, because they wanted the kick drum to sound the way that it did, and it sounds even more that way on Black, they actually had to make a decision. Either reduce the amount of bass that people heard that went onto the vinyl that got pressed and go onto one record, or go onto a double record. That's why it's a double LP. It fitted on CD, but it wouldn't fit on CD with the same amount of bass. So they were given that choice from the pressing engineer. We can fit that onto one disc. It'll be cheaper for you, Lars, but it won't sound as bassy. Or we can have it sound as bassy, but it's going to be a double LP. It's going to cost you a bit more, Lars, to put that in the stores. Lars said, so be it. While people funny about the mix, who cares? It's a powerful record on your Lars good choices. So not too much bass. You may need to roll some of that off. Stereo, too much stereo-ness on vinyl can also cause the needle just to get thrown out of its groove. You might be impressed with how amazeballs your record sounds, but if the needle pops off the record constantly, then people will not be happy with you. So your mastering engineer, when it goes to vinyl, you absolutely need somebody who's got great experience in this to make sure that it sounds good. I know of quite a few local acts who went into the studio not prepared as they should be, didn't take in a record producer. They weren't super happy with the recordings, and then they were even less happy when they got their vinyl back. That meant that they weren't talking to people in the process, and often they went to the cheapest mastering and pressing plant that they could find. While I fully understand that these things are expensive, you don't want to do this. So yes, if you are going to vinyl, you will need different versions of the master, but don't do those yourself. You need to go get the pressing engineer to do those for you. Hand him your master. So in terms of do you need many versions of a masters? No, you do not. Really, these days you need one version, which is what we've got here. And that's going to run off at CD quality, which is 16-bit 44K. So a 1644 master, that's it. That goes out to the world. It should translate. If that does not translate, if that sounds poor when we turn it into an MP3 or hear it come back off Spotify, that is the mix engineer's fault, or the mastering engineer's fault, but most likely the mix engineer's fault. The mix engineer's job is to make sure this song translates anywhere. Back in 1979, when I'm listening to my little red plastic transistor radio with its 1 or 2 inch paper cone, and I am hearing the Pretenders sing Brass in Pocket. He's got brass in pocket. That was just like... And when I saw it on TV, a little 12-inch black and white with, again, a speaker this big in a ghastly plastic tub, it was like... That's because the mix engineer knew what they were doing. I mean, it's a brilliant song, it's beautifully performed, and it's really, really well mixed. You might go, oh, but... No, it's really well mixed, because wherever I hear that song, it's like... It sounds like life. That's what you need to do. So one master is plenty. Yes, we could potentially say, oh, but it needs to be higher quality, man, because, and, 2496 or, Okay, great. If your audience are those 4 jazz weirdos who'll only listen to 2496 FLAC or something like that, or WAV files, yes, know your customer. Give them what they want. Give them what they need to give you what you need, which is the green. Otherwise, don't waste your time. In which case, then you deliver a 2496 master, and all the services should deal with it from there. I know Bandcamp does, because I put a 2496 on there at some personal cost. It was hard work. Just took forever to upload. And did I make any more sales? Not a single one. I make more sales now than I did then, because I built a fan base, and guess what? My fans don't ever ask me what bitrate I'm uploading at, because they don't care. They just go, do I like this? Ooh, more Benedict. I'm going to buy it. So one master is plenty. As for different versions of masters for streaming services, again, no. Your single 1644 master that can go anywhere, anytime, and feel like life to those kids who are listening to it, that's going to work everywhere. If it doesn't work, it just means there's something wrong with your mix, or maybe something wrong with your master. If you've sent it off to some guy whose idea of mastering is just making it as loud and as wide as possible, yeah, then it's probably a mastering guy. If you're trying to do it yourself and your mix just doesn't sound like the way I feel about hearing Brass in Pocket 40-something years later, even if it's through like the world's crappiest iPhone speaker, then it just means your mix is wrong. There isn't a great mix. It's not selling life. It's not translating. And you've got to work on that bit. And then, wherever it goes, it's going to be great. So do not waste your time with like 47 trillion different masters. You only need one. If you are in the general market, which is really anybody but those 4 weirdos who will only buy 2496 jazz or maybe classical or possibly prog, then 1644 is what you need, and that's all you need. Get it out there, and all the translations to all the possible different formats will work adequately. Yes, your tune will sound slightly different, but why do you care if it sounds slightly different? What you should care about is how it feels. Remember, Brass in Pocket, 40-something years later, still feels just as amazing, like life, as it did back then. Personal note, Naked Head. Remember, Mike Packett's a writer-singer here from Naked Head. Naked Generation was the first song that they had on radio, and I get a message on my messenger. Jake's saying to me, "Oh, it's going to be on radio," and he was somewhere out of town, and so I get up the internet stream, and oh my God, does it sound terrible? But the song sounds like it's so exciting. And then Mike Packett sends me one going, "Oh, it's about to be on in Adelaide." Oh, it sounded even worse. Their stream must have been like 4K or something. It was like, oh, horrid. But you know what? It sounded great. The story of the song translated because the mix was good. And the guys themselves were like, wow, we didn't know mixers could sound these. Oh, we've struggled with, all our tight lives, doing stuff in bands, and the mixers never sound right. And it's like, yeah, because we just got to translate. So that's what mastering's about, making sure that your mix, which is a great song and a great performance, is going to fit in its box. And if everything up to the mastering point has been done right, when it comes on, wherever, however bad it sounds, it should translate and feel like life. That's all you need to do. That's basically it. We're done. There's a lot to cover, so I'm going to encourage you to watch this video again. I'm going to encourage you to read the companion video. Sometimes it takes a couple of days for that to be posted and the link to be there, but do both. This takes time. This is, as you've noticed, not about technical stuff. Mixing and mastering is never about technical stuff. Here's the technical aspect in that we need to know that the drums are on fader 1 before we can fader it, stuff like that. But it's about the story. What's the story? How am I telling the story? Once you understand this concept of feel that I'm talking about, and give yourself the time to learn to do this groove compression, because it will feel uncomfortable and weird, and it'll take you a few goes to start to feel it, then you will find suddenly that everything seems so much better. And again, remember, if you are not got those skills, not got that experience, or just fundamentally not particularly suited to it. I am fundamentally not particularly suited to playing guitar and singing. Find relationships with people who are fundamentally suited to the things that you are not fundamentally suited to. Therefore, if I were to be wanting to make a record with vocals and guitar, I would be trying to hire Eddie Van Halen and Rod Stewart, because I know that they are going to be good at what I'm not good at. If it costs some effort, so be it, because opportunity cost is, what's the cost of not doing this? Remember, me trying to put out a record where I sing and play guitar is an insta-fail. All the time, energy, money, everything is wasted. So by me not hiring Eddie and Rod the Mod, the opportunity cost is an insta-fail on the record, a loss of all that effort. So spend the time and money that it takes to create relationships. And sometimes it doesn't even take money. There are times where I do things with no money down, where people provide me something that's just really quite stellar, and they show that they're going to be doing the work to back it. Therefore, I don't just do something for free and then get a kick in the, well, you know where, when they ignore me, don't put me on their socials, and then don't do any work to actually raise the profile of the act, meaning nobody ever hears of it and goes, wow, I love what you did with so-and-so's record. I've got people coming to me going, I love what you did with the Jake Cropley record. I love what you did with the Naked Head record. We want you to work on our next thing. We've got a conversation. Any broad questions about the material, type them on down below, please. If I need to hear something, I need to hear something. I'm not particularly keen on answering hypothetical questions because every mix is unique. We need to deal with them. If you don't want to show the material, don't ask the question. I can't answer you. Most importantly, do the practice work and have a great day.